Welcome to the See Me Be Me podcast. I'm Nile Henry.
And I'm Blair Henry.
And we're two brothers who set out on a mission to make motorsport and STEM careers more diverse, affordable, and inclusive. We are the founders of the Blair Project.
This podcast series delves into the minds of inspirational individuals who come from ordinary and often humble backgrounds, but through their belief, dogged determination, and never give up attitude, have managed to overcome academic, social, or mental challenges to achieve their dream careers.
Our guests will share their life lessons that you too can apply to your own. We hope their stories will inspire you to go further, aim higher, and accept nothing less than you deserve. Your ambition, your purpose is all within, and we're here to help you unlock it. The planet of possibilities are endless.
You know who made it.
So, on today's episode, we are joined by Elsa Zekeng, who is a scientist, an entrepreneur, and a policy advocate. She has a PhD in infectious disease, and she is a global health and founder of SUBVERTED, a startup with a vision to increase diversity in clinical trials. Elsa has been championed as one of the most inspiring, prominent, and influential Black voices in UK tech. Today, we'll be discussing Elsa's journey as an entrepreneur, her ambitions for the future with her newly set up company SUBVERTED, and some of her greatest achievements throughout her career and work. So, without further ado, let's get started.
And welcome to the See Me Be Me podcast, Elsa.
Thank you very much, Nile and Blair. Great to be here.
Excellent. So, first question we'd like to ask to our guests is, can you tell everybody who you are, what's your background, and how did you get onto the journey that you are now?
That's many questions in one now. So my name is Dr. Elsa Zekeng. I introduced myself as a scientist. I sit at the intersection of science, entrepreneurship, and policy. I have a PhD in infectious diseases and global health. I have worked with organizations like the WHO, the European Commission, the UK Cabinet, Prime Minister's Cabinet, and I continue to work with quite a few of these organizations. I've been in entrepreneurship since 2014 with different organizations, and we can get into that later on. And I started on this journey as a scientist, and here I am now collating the words of science, entrepreneurship, and policy.
And so, growing up, who were if you're going back to take us back to the younger Elsa, who were your major role models, like for you to become a scientist?
That's an interesting question because I came from a family where my dad is a scientist, my mom is in science, and my sister went down the route of science. And so being in science was almost inevitable. But I always say that in school growing up, there was no moment specifically when I thought, oh my God, I love science so much. It literally was just because I was not good at geography. I could not get history for the life of me. I did not get English lit. So by virtue of elimination, biology came natural to me, chemistry made sense, and so I went down the science route. So here we are.
So yeah, and so even after you obviously went to school, you knew you wanted to do science and went to college. What was the education system like? Because were you brought up here, or were you brought up outside of the UK?
Sure. So let's take it a step back then. I was born in Leeds in the UK, went back to Cameroon where I grew up till the age of 14, 15. So I went to a secondary school in Cameroon called Our Lady of Lourdes. In Cameroon, it was a boarding school, probably one of the best at the time. It probably still is. And I then left Cameroon at age 15 to come to the UK where I did my A levels at another boarding school in Reading called Queen Anne's School. The theme here, by the way, is that I was in an all-girl boarding school for 7 years. Clearly, my parents were like, yeah, stay away from the boys. But I think that the theme, actually, which I did not learn until much later on when I was at university, sitting on a panel at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, was that I remember this panel. There were about 4 of us, women who were at least at the level of PhD in science. And we looked around and all of us had gone to all-girl boarding schools. And then someone had asked a question from the audience that apparently there's a correlation between girls staying in science and technology and engineering and maths and girls going to all-girl boarding schools. And at the time, I did not know this. This was probably, 2012 or 2013 that I heard of the study. And then after that, I went back and researched it, and it actually is a thing. And the whole concept is that when in adolescent years, teenage years, when you're growing up, the in mixed schools, the boys can be a bit louder and can tease
Yeah.
you a little bit more, and so the girls might feel a bit more shy or than wanting to stay within the STEM fields. But then obviously when you're in an all-girl boarding school, you don't have that, right? And you're sort of treated equally throughout. And so I just thought that that was very interesting, right? So I came from a space from being cocooned really within my family setting where I
Yeah.
had the role models, I saw science all around me, to then going into a community setting and an education system, which was, again, was perfect, was a perfect setting for me to stay in STEM, and then going into university. So it was only later on and now really that I realized that I basically was set up to stay in STEM, like, I don't know, by virtue of my upbringing and the school systems that I went to. And I think that's something that is very key as we continue to talk about representation in STEM, girls staying in STEM, increasing that zeal for women to want to actually stay and pursue the sciences to the highest level. It starts from a very, very young age.
Yeah.
And
Now
then,
that look, just one point. No, that's very interesting what you said, Elsa, because I've spoken to other ladies in the world of STEM who've said a similar thing, that they've gone to a boarding school or an all girls school, and that's been almost the trajectory of women coming into STEM. And I think, you know, within mixed schools, it is like, I don't know what it is about the system. Maybe it's from teachers say, guys go and do, you know, these sorts of things, and girls go and do this. And sometimes girls are put away from doing, whether it's science or engineering. So that's kind of an interesting thing. So for you, do you think there's any way that we can encourage more girls into STEM in mixed schools? Well, how do we break down those barriers?
Absolutely. I think that it's going to be a mixed effort, right? So that could be after school clubs. But then I also think that it's something for the teachers to really just pay attention to, right?
Yeah.
And just because a girl is not shooting her hand up at the question to answer the question, that does not mean that she doesn't know the answer. Maybe she might know it. Maybe she's a bit timid. Maybe she's scared of, what if it's a wrong answer? The boys will tease me, right? And at that point is the teacher's responsibility to sort of set the tone of the room and make sure that everyone knows that it's okay, and also encourage everyone to sort of come up and speak up. And if there's specific individuals who can constantly are quick to answer, probably give someone else the opportunity, right? So I think it's, yes, within we can do a lot of added activities, after school clubs. I'm on the board for the Science and Industry Museum, having to encourage girls to come into the museum and curate a safe space for them to be able to share their interests. But I think
Mm,
within the school system, it's
yeah.
setting that tone. So.
I was going to ask Elsa, just as a follow up, as you're a black woman working in the field of STEM, do you feel that you've had to overcome quite a few barriers to pursue a career in this sector?
Sure, I would say that initially, I never quite thought about it because, again, as I've said, the whole setup throughout it wasn't something that specifically crossed my mind.
Yeah,
But I would say that when I did my BSc, so I did my BSc in molecular biology with a year in industry.
yeah,
And my year in industry, I worked at a biotech company based out in Manchester, and I am still extremely close with the founders. And I actually had lunch with one of them a couple of months back. The whole company, I was the only woman and the only black woman, and I think within the building, I probably was like the only black woman. And by virtue, not even by virtue of that, I would say that some of my biggest allies and mentors have been white men.
yeah,
So I would say barriers, I would not particularly call them barriers. I would probably say I was encouraged. And I think that my attitude whenever I went into work was always, what can I do? How can I learn? And this is not to say that other women don't have these barriers, right? But I think that because of how I was conditioned within my growing up, not being in STEM was not an option, right? It was, I didn't come in seeking the validation or seeking for someone to encourage me because I already had that. And that is a privilege that I understand. It was just looking for allies to support me throughout that process. And I was very lucky to have them.
And in terms of where you are today, I mean, you're currently the founder of Soccer Data.
Yeah.
Uh, would you be able to just take us through your organization and why you set it up?
Sure. So, Circa Data is a baby that has been brewing for a long while, subconsciously, and finally is coming to fruition. I think, as I've mentioned, I'm a scientist, and health equity has been the running theme through almost everything that I've done. So, from the age of 16, I was working with UNICEF on
Yeah,
um, a really reaching increasing communications towards specific diseases. But Soka Data, I would say, was born. The idea was born from my PhD. So I did my PhD in infectious diseases and global health. And during my PhD, I focused on collecting biomarkers for influenza A diagnostics. And during my PhD as well, I used samples from Senegal and West Africa and samples from here in the UK, London, and Liverpool. And the whole premise was very much, how does genetics affect the biomarkers that we find?
yeah,
And the premise behind that is that at the moment, for genetic research, genetic data from Black and ethnic minority communities come up to about 4%,
wow,
whilst the rest is very much white European, right? And again, if the data that is being used to create medications, drugs, clinical trials, everything in between is predominantly on over 90% white, right? That means that our genetics are not being represented. And that definitely means that the drugs that are being created puts us at a disadvantage, right?
yeah,
And over COVID, I did quite a few different talks, and one of the interesting questions that kept coming up, which we saw in the news, was what was the clinical trial representations of Black and ethnic minority communities, and it
yeah,
was extremely low. And we saw that with hesitancy to take up the COVID-19 vaccine, and quite a few of these different reactions towards the vaccine. So, Soka Data is very much set up to increase data collection, increase participation of Black and ethnic minority communities within the clinical trial space. And by that, I mean pulling together that data so that companies that are developing drugs and are developing medications and vaccines can have access to that data when they are creating vaccines, medications,
yeah.
all the rest. We hear that I think we've seen that in recruitment where companies have gone, we don't have access to the data, or we don't know where these people live, or we don't have all of that. And Circle Data is very much trying to bring that to the forefront, and also engaging with our communities to really understand the importance of participation in clinical trials. I understand the historical um, context behind it and our
Yeah.
resistance from Black and ethnic minority communities to not want to engage. But it's remembering that as long as we stay out of the engagement, we see that now with AI, we're literally just going to keep getting left behind, because if our data is not there, then AI will be trained on data that is overrepresented of white and ethnic minority, of white demographics. And then
Yeah.
again, the equities keep perpetuating, the inequities keep perpetuating. So yeah, Circle Data is here to bridge that gap between pharma, biotech companies, and Black and ethnic minority communities as it pertains to biomedical data and clinical trial research.
So you were saying one of the things I found interesting was you're saying that there was not a big intake of like black people embracing clinical trials. Do you feel there's a fair element there in the reason why black people don't take part in clinical trials,
Oh,
or
absolutely.
not as much? Yeah,
No, absolutely. In May 2023, so earlier on this year, we conducted a piece of research that we engaged with Black and ethnic minority communities and understanding trust and clinical trials. And we heard a lot of it, right? And we know that there's a massive fear element, which is in America, you had a Tuskegee experiment. In the 90s in Nigeria, you had a vaccine trial that went on that did not pass the ethical approvals. So yeah, there are many reasons why Black and ethnic minority communities are refraining from participating. But I think there's also the flip side of when these things have happened, there have been solutions that have been put in place to be able to ensure that they don't happen again. But we don't hear about those
Yeah.
solutions, right? That have been put in place, and so we end up in a situation where we don't trust. There's a massive trust element here. You saw Black communities don't trust the motives, whilst white communities don't trust the competence. And I think that was a very interesting nuance. So with when you came to vaccine development, white demographics were saying, well, the vaccine came out quite quickly. We don't trust how it was developed. So it wasn't that they didn't trust the systems developing it, whilst Black and ethnic minorities community say, well, I don't trust the motives and I don't trust the system developing it. They're trying to use us as guinea pigs. There's so many of these statements that were being made. Like, what happens if I have an adverse event? What happens if I have a reaction to it? So it's up to us then to shine the light on it and encourage these companies to increase transparency, but also to engage with our communities, because there are so many diseases that we face that are not being researched just because there is a limited amount of information around how it perpetuates within our system. So yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna ask a question in terms of that piece around, you know, 'cause in terms of the pharma biomedical industry. Was it just because they're not doing those trials on Black people because, maybe the industry is not as diverse, and then, there are too many people banging the drum about getting medication for people from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds, or is it just that they want to, but it is down to the motives for the Black community? It's like, oh, we can't trust it if it's if these new and emerging drugs, like, we don't know, it might have side effects. So do you think it is more to do with the motives behind it, like Black people just not wanting to get involved in clinical trials, or do you think some of it might be that the industry might not be diverse and there might not be too many people banging the drum to do medication for ethnic minorities or to trial it on ethnic minorities?
No, absolutely. I think it's absolutely both ways. So there's a lack of diversity in terms of sponsors from these companies and engaging with our communities. And even when they do engage with our communities, there's a lack of trust. I think Blair and I were talking earlier on about when you go into schools and people see people like yourself and Nile having being successful and excelling within the space, they think, oh yes, I can do that too. Within the biomedical space, if you don't see someone like yourself, it probably is an increase in mistrust or an increase in skepticism, right? Um, there are several reasons why. There are other reasons why pharma and biotech companies have stated why they've not engaged. Some of them have included that um, participation takes longer to recruit within our communities. And this is, I think, for reasons like this, you have to probably have an education piece and build that trust over time. They've stated that our communities, when you do recruit, sometimes we don't stay on long enough. So there's a higher dropout rate.
Yeah.
Now, reasons around that, I'm not too sure of that. But I think definitely there's a lack of sponsorship from our communities. But then also on our flip side, right, from our communities, it's even the awareness of clinical trials, right? There's even, are we aware of what is going on? Are we aware of, if I had God forbid, but if I had a cancer today that was like specific to my genetics, would there be a medication or a clinical trial that I will be able to get onto that might give me a life-saving option? I have heard of medications that have been produced where they're more tolerance for people from Black communities, just because of how the medication was produced. But so I mean, I think there's a confluence of factors on both sides. So education, trust, mistrust. But I always say at the end of the day, the onus and the responsibility will remain on the pharmaceutical and biotech companies to be able to ensure that they engage with these communities and make sure that their processes really are ones that our communities can engage with in a long-term basis. And just to add to that quickly, because it's very much a regulated space, right? So the FDA earlier on last year actually put out a statement where they're now ensuring that pharma and biotech companies make sure that when they're submitting approvals for drugs, they actually have a specific representation for Black and ethnic minority communities. So because that has now come from the top, right? These companies are now having to make those changes internally. So it then goes to show you that trickle down effect in terms of this is where the my policy head comes in. How are governments ensuring that this trickles down, and then the private sector is ensuring that they're engaging with our communities, and then we can then respond back, and I say we from a community perspective, as to how do we engage with these clinical trials.
No, that's fantastic, and it's great to see that starting to evolve and come into shape. But Elsa, I want to take it back because obviously we've known each other for a long time, especially in the world of entrepreneurship. So you're one of, I'd say, you're one of the few that grew up from a very early age and knew what you wanted to do. You wanted to be a scientist. You went through the education system, graduated, came out PhD. Infectious diseases, but you're also now an entrepreneur. Where did the love of entrepreneurship come from?
So that came from, well, the love for entrepreneurship. I probably would say, if I have to even take it further back, so my mom is really an entrepreneur because she has a pharmacy in Cameroon. And so, as much as she's a pharmacist, so she's a scientist by training, her day-to-day trade is running a pharmacy. So I grew up going to the pharmacy, doing accounts. Until today, I still hear her on the phone, making sure that everything is running smoothly and her business is not going down to the ground. So perhaps subconsciously, that was always in the back of my mind. But personally, I would say it sort of happened by happenstance. It was 2014. I was 9 months into my PhD. I was like, okay, I love science. I do not like academia. What am I going to do with my life? That was basically my question. And so I went through this whole process of trying to understand what it was I was going to do with my life. And I started organizing events. That's literally how it started, engaging with biotech companies locally, and trying to understand how can we as students connect with them and seek careers outside academia, so consulting, medical writing. And I think it was the concept or the notion that because you've done a PhD, you don't have to do a postdoc, and then you have to become a professor at uni, and that was your track line. That was it or nothing. And I was like, I refuse for that to be my life. So I need to find it out. And so at that time, I then eventually started what is called the Northwest Biotech Initiative. And that was the first time I was ever called an entrepreneur. And I remember thinking, what is that? I'm just a scientist. And I had a co-founder called Catherine, and she was based in the University of Manchester, and she was doing her PhD as well. And we were going down the same track. And over the course of the next 3 to 4 years that followed, we gained sponsorship, and we raised about, under my management, I like to say, under the time that we were managing it, raised about £5,500, which at the time was good money considering that we had nothing, and we were just these students sort of trying to figure out what we could do. And but then life really happened, which was I had to finish my PhD, right? Like I still had a PhD to do, and I could not run NBI per se as a business, and I also could not drop out because my visa depended on this, on me doing my PhD. So yeah, so that was the first go at entrepreneurship. So I then had to step down from running it, and NBI still runs till today. It's in its 10th year. It's quite wild to think that we started something 10 years ago that is still going. And I think to date, over 30 students have gone on to gain jobs, internships, full-time positions outside of academia. Thank you. And I went up and saw the team earlier on this year and continue having conversations with them and seeing how they can continue developing it. And so yeah, that was the first bit. And I think after that I thought, oh, this entrepreneurship thing, I like it. Let's see what else we can build. So yeah.
I wanted to just go back through. This is from about 8 years ago, Elsa. I was reading from your bio that you worked alongside the World Health Organization during like the outbreak of the Ebola virus back in 2015, and I believe you had to, was it spend 6 weeks in Guinea?
Yes,
Was it
that's correct.
during the outbreak? So could you take us through that experience and like some of the challenges that you faced?
I can't believe that's been 8 years now. Good Lord. It feels like it was just yesterday. Sure. So it's 2015. I'm doing my PhD at the University of Liverpool. The lab that I was in specifically focused on respiratory diseases. So we did influenza, Ebola,
Yeah.
MERS, and COVID actually. And the outbreak happens. My supervisor has partnerships with Public Health England and the WHO, and the WHO sends out, I guess, a recruitment form which says that they want scientists who would volunteer to deploy and go out to Guinea and support the outbreak, and that is from a scientific perspective, so diagnosis and all the rest of that. And so I volunteer and go through this training process and eventually get shipped out to Guinea, where we spend 6 weeks working 12 to 14-hour days, seven
Wow.
days a week,
Gosh.
testing samples for Ebola and malaria. And our biggest fear was that we were going to get Ebola. And that was the whole point. Just make sure you don't contract Ebola. I think I was prepared for the physical toll it was going to take on my body. I was not prepared for the emotional toll. Because you're literally at the front line. And when I say literally at the front line, our diagnostic lab was again in the middle of nowhere. So you're working in a low resource setting, and it wasn't fancy buildings as maybe you might think in Public Health England. Think literally structures put up in wood, covered and made sure that they're sterilized. And so we were, let's say, standing at maybe 100 meters to the tent of the people who had Ebola.
Oh
And
gosh.
so you could see doctors going in and out every day with their hazmat suits, trying to take care of them. You could see when people died and passed away, and having to be taken to be incinerated because they could not bury bodies because the incinerator was literally right next to it. So I remember coming out a few times and just throwing up because that emotional toll I was not ready for. But I would say it's an experience that completely changes you. There are quite a few things that I saw on ground that led to me coming back and campaigning for partnership or equal partnership
Yeah.
in the between the global north and the global south because of quite a few incidents that happened on ground because we were attacked almost at gunpoint. And at that point, we thought we came out here thinking we may die from Ebola, but it seems like that may not be the case. We might actually get
Wow.
killed, actually killed. So yeah, it was a very, very interesting experience to say the least, but one I would not trade for anything. And it changes you in ways that you cannot come back from.
And I saw as a result, as a result for your work out in Guinea during the Ebola outbreak, that you received a medal from the Queen
Yeah.
herself. So, how did it feel to be awarded by royalty?
I mean, it was very rewarding. I think it was very it was a nice acknowledgement of our efforts. I'm not going to lie,
Yeah,
but I think that by the time that happens, it's so much has happened. Like you can imagine the story that I've just told, right? You understand or try. You get a glimpse into war veterans may feel like when they come back, and
yeah, yeah.
they're nice accolades, but there's that feeling and impression that just never leaves you. So yeah.
Brilliant. And just going into just like the success that you've had as an entrepreneur, as being a black woman working in tech, you've received a lot of praise for some of the work that you've done in your career. Like you've been in the top 50 most inspiring black voices by Tech Nation, and I believe you were seen as an agent of change from the Northern Power Women as well. So, what is it like to be championed by all these big organizations?
I think something that I always say, right, is that interestingly enough, I really don't live for the applause. It's nice, but it's something that I literally go, "Oh, that was nice, thank you. It's a lovely evening, and it's we all dress up, and you know what the
Yeah,
awards are like, guys. Like we've
yeah,
been
yeah,
quite a
yeah.
few of them, right? Um, And it's a lovely evening, it's a nice recognition, and it makes your CV look shiny, right? But I think as for me, it's always been what is the work that you use those awards and those accolades to do. And for me, for each new accolade and each new praise, it's more responsibility for me. It's more so how am I going to use that to champion the work that I'm doing further, to increase diversity, to increase representation, to hold companies accountable, to hold government accountable. How does this new credibility, because that's what it is really, it just gives your work credibility, gives you this added layer of credibility, and it's a nice feeling. But it's how do you then use that to feed back into the work that we've continued to do? And I think you guys, for example, are an example of people who have completely continued to do that day in day out, right? You continue to raise that bar in
Yeah.
terms of I've been given this grace, so how do we push it further? And I think it's the same for me. So yeah.
So Elsa, entrepreneur, scientist, public speaker, board member and trustee. What does, for our audience, what does an average day look like for you?
Do you know what's funny? I started trying to do this TikTok trend where I'll try and capture my average day. It's not worked. I can see you laughing. I think it's just so different every single day. And then I thought, do you know what? I give up. I'll capture it as I can. It depends on the weeks and it depends on the days, right? At the moment, it's obviously the summer, so board meetings are in recess. So, and those will pick back up in September. But on a day-to-day basis, I would say it's a mix of client engagement, is a mix of where our projects at. It's a mix of sending out pitch decks. It's a mix of reaching out to investors, following up on others, and making sure that those that are already secured are happy, and yeah, and thriving. So it just literally depends. And then of course, in between all of that, you try and fit in working out. And I'm very much a runner slash do yoga. You try and sleep properly, you try and eat properly, and then you try and catch up with friends and family. That never works out as you would, or at least for me, it doesn't always work as balanced as I would like to. But trying to fit all of that in. And I think I've got into a phase where I am no longer rewarding that consistently busy lifestyle, and just knowing that it's a marathon and not a race.
Yeah.
It's probably something that we're going to be doing for the next 10 years. And trying to burn yourself out while doing that is inefficient for everybody involved. So take it as a day at a time, have that to-do list, tick it off, and then tomorrow's another day.
And then go on now.
No, go ahead.
I was just about to say, Elsa, in terms of just starting out with your career and all the skills that you picked up along your journey, what would you say are the 3 skills or traits that you picked up on your journey that's helped to make you the success that you are today?
Whew, 3 skills. I would say consistently learning. And that by that, I literally mean continuously putting yourself out there. And that could be formally or informally. Clearly, I've done that formally through all my education, well, formal education. But
Yeah.
I would say that the entrepreneurial ventures that I've gone through have taught me as much. So, and I continue to do this. So, for example, yesterday I had an interview for the Quantic MBA business school. Now, whether I get in, I guess we'll find out at some point. But it's just continuously putting yourself out there to continuously learning. 2, I would say adaptability. You have to be able to go with the flow. I think we've seen that with COVID. Everyone had to pivot, change, find different ways. But that is literally your everyday life as a business owner, especially in entrepreneurship, and really for successful life. You have to be able to pivot. And I would say thirdly is people, right? Relationships. People do business with people. You might be competent, but if someone doesn't like you, they will not do business with you and
Yeah.
they will not succeed with you. And I think sometimes we think competence can overshadow likability or overshadow being an arrogant piece of work, but it cannot. So I think it's just being able to build those relationships and leverage your networks and just be a nice person. So yeah.
And where would you like Soka Data to be in the next 5 years?
Oh, that's a very good question. Soka Data, will be launched. In 5 years, it will be working with pharma and biotech companies. And you can think of, we can go as big as the J&Js, the Novartis, the AstraZenecas, and being able to support them with access to data in their clinical trial research. Well, not just clinical trial, I keep saying clinical trial, but just preclinical research, and then obviously clinical trial research as well. It would be engaging with communities. I say that the goal is to have over 1 million data points from Black and ethnic minority communities on the platform, so that before any drug or any vaccine is being sent to market, the question in pharma and biotech minds is, has it been run through SOCA data? And that is have we included data points from these communities? And then it would have engaged with different communities around the world as well, global majority, as I always say, in want to engage with the biomedical space and involved in biomedical data research. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. So how soon can we see will the platform be launched? Is it coming later this year, or is it next year?
You're pushing for deadlines now. No, you're waiting, and you know that I'm clearly holding back on a lot of things. Like, how far can I go? I would say.
Can we get the first reveal on the CBBB podcast?
Maybe we'll say that when it's about to be launched, I'll come back here and say when it will be launched. But it's all being developed at the moment. But the goal is to have it launched by next year. I could say that now. Q1, Q4 next year, we will see.
Well, we'll be keeping our eyes peeled on this, Elsa. So we're about to go into the bonus part of the CBBB podcast, where we ask 3 fun questions. Well, okay. They are fun. One of them's quite serious for me, though. One of them is, and we're going to go into the serious one first, Elsa. And I will be judging you on the answer here.
I'm worried.
So, should pineapple be on a pizza?
No. Absolutely no. That's an easy one.
Brilliant. Well, we've had some people say pineapple belongs on a pizza, and I've almost had to shut the podcast down and forget the other questions, because, it's for me, it just shouldn't be on a pizza. So, obviously, in terms of your experience, then, where has been the most interesting place that you've traveled to, and why?
Travel to in terms of experience, I would say Cape Town, South Africa. And I say that because it's such an interesting mix of the culture, the history, the potential, the hopes and dreams that you still see in the context of apartheid and how it's transitioned to what it is to date. So I would probably say that's the most interesting place, and that is very much from an intellectual level. So the possibilities are endless. There's so much potential there in terms of the people, the companies, and all of that, entrepreneurship, and even the government sort of supports it to a certain level. From a geographical landscape, I love swimming and I love hiking. It's the best place for anyone who wants to do both, by the way, putting it out there for anyone listening. And also I love wine, so you can do the beautiful wine tours. It just has a different feel that I would say that's the most interesting bit.
That is quite funny, because I was having a chat with somebody yesterday at a networking event, and they were telling me that I need to go to Cape Town. I need to go to South Africa, because...
What can I say? The universe is lining up for you. To clearly go.
So I need to pack my bags and go over there. Like I said, it's so beautiful. Like you can live a much better life in South Africa than in rainy old Manchester. So no, that's quite interesting. It's quite funny. And then the third question I'd ask: if you could have any superpower, which superpower would you choose?
Read minds.
Oh, why read minds?
Interesting.
I can change and influence absolutely everything if I know what you're thinking. Can you imagine that you're pitching your business and you can already hear the questions that this investor is asking, and you can changing everything, answering everything on the spot? I
Well,
think
you probably go on.
no, I think it's. I think I find minds very, very fascinating, right? I'm very much an intellectual person, sapiosexual as well, and I love having these kind of conversations and debates. So I just think it would be very interesting to just sit there and wonder, what is this person thinking? But for me, the personal gain, I'm sorry guys, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm hustling in the streets. I need to be able to see how I can get more money out of investors or out of clients. So yeah, there you go.
Would you actually be doing any work, or would you just be doing funding rounds every single day, trying to get more money?
No, of course not. But it's just like the whole
Series
vibe.
A, B, C, D. Here we keep going. Elsa, world's first trillionaire, and everyone's like, "Oh my god, how did she do it?"
No, but imagine the kind of value you'll be providing, right? Because sometimes you're like even selling to a client and you're trying to answer questions and you're preempting questions, but you'll be able to sell so much value and be able to package what all our businesses into a way that the person you're talking to completely relates to. Brilliant, it's done. Done deal. We'll have no more wars. We'll have, look, sort it. Sort the world out with reading minds. There you go.
As long as you're not in the same room as like multiple people, and you're just trying to read too many thoughts, and you're just like, right, I just want to focus on that one person.
So I should caveat that then, because I want to be able to switch it on and switch it off and be like, what is Nile today? What is Nile thinking today? And then turn it off. And then tomorrow we do Blair. So yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah. No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, that's all we've got time for. Thank you so much, Elsa, for being on the See Me Be Me podcast. Before we completely wrap it up, is there anything that we haven't mentioned that you'd like to tell our audience now?
No, nothing.
No.
Yeah.
And if anybody wants to follow you on your journey, where can people go to follow you?
Sure. So I'm at Elsa Zekeng on basically all platforms. So Instagram, LinkedIn, it's Dr. Elsa Zekeng, Twitter at Elsa Zekeng. So follow the journey.
And what about Soka Data? Can they follow you on Soka Data? Is that live yet?
No,
in terms of
it has a website. So Soka
Data has a website.
So it's soka-data.com, but it's not yet been on any social media platforms. But that again is a strategy that's in place. So we'll get.
So guys, you've heard it. There's no social media yet, but head on to the website and go and see, go find out some of the cool stuff that they're doing. So thank you, Elsa, again for being on the See Me Be Me podcast, and we definitely have to invite you back, maybe in a year's time, and see how everything's going.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Brilliant.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Elsa.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Blair,
Nile,
what did you think of today's guest?
I thought Elsa today was really inspiring. She's basically following her dreams. She's always wanted to be a scientist. She's now fulfilling the dream as a scientist, but now she's also gone on that entrepreneurial pathway. So she said that she's following essentially in the footsteps of her mother, because her mother opened up like her own pharmacy business. And she's basically taken it in her stride and just grown to the point where she's got her own organization, Soccer Data, which I believe is going to be a massive success in the future. And what I also took is that the three main skills that Elsa's learned over the time as being an entrepreneur. So consistency, adaptability, and then people and relationships, and how important all those key skills are in terms of developing yourself as a business person. What about yourself?
Yeah, no, it's obviously we've known Elsa for quite a number of years, and it's great to see the development and trajectory she's gone on since we first known her. So I didn't know that she grew. It's interesting to know that she grew up from a very early age wanting to be a scientist, and I think it's that importance of having role models. So obviously a mum owning her own business and her dad, they both of them being scientists, have encouraged her to follow that pathway. And there's that little thing of that a lot of the women who end up in STEM careers all went to all female schools or boarding schools.
Yeah.
And Elsa, she's discovered that, and she went to boarding school as well. So, and the little topics, little conversations that we've had about how do we get more young girls from mixed schools to get involved within going down a STEM related career. Was a really good quick chat. It was a good chat though. And yeah, no, it's just finding out more information about the biotech, biomedical world, big pharma, and how, it's interesting that they do discriminate, not purposely, but against, there's not enough clinical trials being done with people from different races. And then even about, certain communities like the Black community not getting involved in clinical trials because of, mistrust and things
fear
like
and
that.
whatnot, from the past experiences and
but how her company is looking to change all that so that we can get I believe she set herself a goal 1 million people from backgrounds to be on that database, and to be as for her company to be as big as AstraZeneca, which I definitely think, with Elsa being so determined, driven, and passionate, I definitely think it can get there. So I'm very excited to see where the future holds for Elsa and her business, and hopefully they've obviously not launched a product yet, but hopefully maybe in a year's time they've managed to raise the investment and they've launched it, and then we can invite her back on the podcast to see how well she's doing.
It would really be great to hear where Elsa is by this time, either next year or within the next 2 years. But I think she's on the right path at the moment, and wish her all the best in her future ventures.
Yeah. And so, guys, if you really enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We are on the following platforms. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Get Me Motoring, and then we're on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube at The Blair Project. So if you're not, go and subscribe to us on all those major platforms, and stay tuned for another exciting episode of the See Me, Be Me podcast. Take care.
This is Blair and Nile signing out.
If you've liked today's episode, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The Blair Project is on all major social media platforms, including Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube at The Blair Project. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Yes, we are on TikTok at Get Me Motoring. If you'd like to follow myself individually, I am on Instagram at Nile Henry, and also LinkedIn at Nile Henry as well.
And if you want to follow myself, I'm on Instagram as BlairHenry_97, and also on LinkedIn as just Blair Henry.
So we look forward to having you on the next episode. So stay tuned. Take care.
Until next time.